Jesus didn't have a problem with people that's in the streets. He had a problem with religious people.
How can I help anybody when I was not even able to help my own son?
I would never do that. And I became that in a matter of minutes when they took my pain pills away.
And I said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be.
This is Faith in Your Recovery. I am Randy Davis. Welcome to the battle. Here we are once again, and we are thrilled to have you with us. Don't know if this is your first time to tune in to our podcast or maybe your umpteenth time. We're just glad you're here, and we believe we can make a difference for you and in you. We want to walk beside you. We don't want to stand away. We want to be as close as you'll allow us to be. As always, we're looking at all things recovery. And our approach today is going to prove that, because our guest is not someone with a personal past of addiction issues, but she's what we call today an adult child of an alcoholic. She had to deal with that battle. She's going to share some of her hurts from that. She's going to wrap this up with a story that will stick with you. I can guarantee every moment of that. So Hailey Rolsten, welcome to Faith in Your Recovery.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a thrill. We haven't connected in a while. We had some times together. We've talked, but how nice to see you face to face and have you here in the studio.
Yeah, a lot of things have happened since the last time I saw you.
Awesome. We're looking forward to hearing what that is and just how life's going.
Yeah.
But let's back up. Let's back up to those earlier days. Tell us about Hailey. We'll get into the rest of the story and the struggles, but help the folks to know more about you, who you are, where life is, where it came from.
Yeah. So I am originally from Muncie. I am an only child of my father, and I had a half brother from my mom's side. Grew up in Muncie, went to school there for a little while, then moved out to the country, kind of lived in the country life. And my mom and dad were not together. After I was about 5 years old, they split up. And so I lived in between my mom and dad's growing up. And I went to college at Ball State in Muncie, and I currently live in Noblesville, and I work as a tax accountant in Carmel. So,
yeah, that's neat. So, During those younger days, what were some of your interests, your hobbies? What were those things you like to spend time doing?
Yeah, I spent a lot of summers playing softball. I did some cheerleading, dance, volleyball. When I lived in Muncie, I lived in a neighborhood, so I got to ride around with the kids and ride my bicycle and do fun things like that. But outside of sports, I was a nerd, so I got straight A's through school. When I wasn't hanging out with my friends, I was studying, reading, doing schoolwork. I was a goody two-shoes, my friends would say. So
I remember that phrase from the day, though there's a few generations between us. I think most folks know what that means.
Yes. Yeah. That was me.
Okay. So how was life? How would you grade life during your high school years? Tell us a little bit about some of the home dynamics and the challenges that were created by, your parental habits or the habits of your parents.
Yeah. I had great parents. My dad, like I said, I was an only child, so he was my best friend. We did all kinds of things together. I dealt with a lot of anxiety from when I started middle school through the end of high school. I dealt with anxiety, panic attacks, things like that. A lot of it was from my home life. I didn't have a bad home life by any means, but having two separate homes that you're growing up in is a little challenging, especially kind of doing it by myself. My brother was 15 years older than me, so I lived in between two homes kind of alone, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to do well in school, do well in sports, and that caused some anxiety issues I had growing up. But outside of that, I mean, I was a strong kid, and dealt with a lot, but you probably would never know if you didn't really know me. So
What was the difference in home life A and home life B? Were there different expectations from being with mom or being with dad?
there were, it was different. So I was daddy's little girl. So dad did whatever I wanted him to do. He was very, very tender-hearted, loving, compassionate. We spent a lot of quality time together. So we would spend a lot of time just him and I sitting in the living room talking, he played music. So I would listen to him play guitar. It was
What kind of music? What was he into?
Oh, Pink Floyd, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a lot of music that I had no interest in. Still really don't. But hearing the songs, I mean, in fact, I was just listening to some songs that he liked last night. I don't personally like the music, but it reminds me of him, which I love. So environment with him was very calming. It was relaxing. It was loving. And we'll get into this later, but as I was in high school, middle school, college, he was dealing with addiction. So nighttime got a little stressful for me being there because he would nod off and things like that. So that part was a little where the anxiety came in.
Sure.
Mom home was different. She's very got to make sure your room's clean, got to make sure your homework's done, got to, make sure you're taking care of your responsibilities. And it was a lot more task oriented at my mom's and a lot less compassionate like it was at my dad's. Not to say my mom doesn't love me, because obviously she does. It's just she shows it in a different way.
We all do, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yep.
Some of us are huggers, some of us aren't, some of us a handshake's good enough. And I've heard it said, I love you, and I'll tell you when I stop loving you, so don't wonder why I didn't say I love you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you experienced a lot right there between the two, and I'm sure that required you a little change of your inner emotions to go from house A to house B.
It did. And I had anxiety issues stemming from both homes, but in different ways. So the anxiety I dealt with at my mom's was, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? Am I staying out of the way enough? Am I doing enough chores? A lot of it was, am I doing enough? My dad, it was never that way. It was whatever you're doing is enough. And so my dad, I got anxiety there from dealing with the way that he lived his life, less structure, nodding off at night, not very organized. At my mom, she was very clean, organized, task oriented. So it was completely different lives, and anxiety stemming from both.
And that's obvious. I could see that. You have to play one role here and the other role there. And one place enough is enough, and at the other it doesn't seem like
That's
enough
right.
is enough.
You kind of have to be two different kids.
Yeah, and that had to be difficult.
Yeah.
How did that reflect on you at school? How did the other kids see you? What was the front that you showed them?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, I mean, my friends would not know that I lived the life that I did when I was at school. Like I said, I was a goody two-shoes. I made sure I got straight A's. I was very organized in my school. I've learned in my adult life now that I tend to be really controlling because there was so much that was out of my control.
Oh, yes.
So in school, I was very controlling. I had planners, notepads of what I needed to get done, how I was going to do it, a plan. I mean, I was way ahead of it compared to other kids my age in high school because school was the one thing I had control over. I was smart. I was good with teachers. Teachers loved me. I was the teacher's pet. I didn't get in trouble because that was the one place, school was, that I had control of everything on my own. So my friends, I was a goody two-shoe. I didn't drink, I didn't party in school. My friends did, because that, that's kind of normal if you're a popular kid, going to parties and stuff in high school, but that was not me.
Okay. You touched lightly on the struggles your dad had and some of those issues that created at home, in you, for you, around you. Tell us some more about that. And I know, this isn't about bashing your dad, and I know you never have, but you're honest with what you dealt with. And I'm sure there are those listeners out there who are where you have been, and they need to hear somebody they can relate to.
Yeah. So early on, when I was a young kid, my dad, the first thing I remember is he rode dirt bikes. So he got in a dirt bike accident and he hurt his shoulder. So he had to have surgery on his shoulder. And with surgery comes pain pills. I was in elementary school at the time. So for a couple of years, he was on pain pills. And when you're in 3rd, 4th grade, you don't know what's going on. You're just living your life as a kid. In 5th grade, I remember he went to Florida for a little while. And I had no idea why he went there. But I remember getting a letter from him saying, "Hey, Hailey, things are good down here in Florida. I'm going to be so much better. I'm going to be able to play with you more," and things like that. And I didn't know what that meant. I just thought, okay, he's taking a vacation in Florida. Like, good for you, Dad. And then in middle school, he fell on ice on a sidewalk and hurt his knee. So he had to get surgery again. And so he started taking pain pills again in middle school. At that point, I kind of understood a little more what was going on. And he got married, and him and his wife were enablers of each other. And so when my dad was on pain pills from his knee surgery, it just kind of piled on and kept piling on. And he also drank growing up. I don't remember it ever being an issue, but I remember when he started taking pain pills from his knee surgery, that the pills and the drinking together, it started affecting him negatively. So
not a good combination.
Not a good combination, not at all. And it just got worse and worse through high school. He started ordering pills off the black market. When he passed away, I found tons of pills that he had bought overseas, not through prescription. So it started as prescription from his knee surgery. And then when they stopped giving it to him, he found it other ways.
Exactly.
So he did that up through, close to the time that he passed away. And I spent a lot of time worrying about him. As I got older and I started to realize what was going on, I spent a lot of time, and a lot of my anxiety in high school and college came from worrying about him. I just never knew when I was going to find him unconscious.
Yeah.
He would, like I alluded to earlier, I would go spend time with him, and at night he would start falling asleep in his chair, and I'd be talking to him and I'd look over and he's nodding off. And, I always thought it was just because he was tired. But as I got older, I realized that he wasn't taking care of his body.
Yes.
And so I'd look over and he'd be nodding off. And there was a couple times where he would be eating. He fell asleep while he was eating, and the food would just fall down his chest. And I knew that wasn't normal. So seeing that was really hard growing up, and being an only child and a daddy's little girl growing up, I had a very tender spot to my dad. So seeing him that way was hard.
I can't imagine what that was like. Did you have somebody you could talk to about it, or did you have to internalize that? How were you dealing with it at that time?
Yeah, so in high school, really, it wasn't something I wanted to talk to people about. I didn't want people thinking that I had a life that was hard. On one hand, it's embarrassing when you're a teenager and you have parents and family members in addiction. It's not something to be proud of. It's not something, I always wanted to be the kid that came from the family that was at all my sporting events, that dropped me off at school every day, that, supported everything I did and was there for everything. And I didn't have that. And so I didn't want to acknowledge it to people outside of the people who knew that that's what I was living. So I didn't talk to really any friends about it. So the really only person I talked to was my mom when I was talking to her about my dad. And her and my dad didn't have a good relationship. They did not talk from the time they split up till, they'd never talked. So whenever I would talk to her about it, it would make her upset because she didn't want me to see those things. And so instead of having someone to be there to understand what I was going through, it was more of frustration from her.
Okay.
And she did the best that she could. She, like I said earlier, she was very like, all right, what are the facts? What are the, no fluff. Yeah. And so when I, talking to her, it was, well, what are you going to do, Hailey? This is how he is. And that's just, kind of what it's going to be. So I really didn't have anyone to lead me or guide me on how to deal with the situation. So it just kind of built up in me, and I had a lot of worry and anxiety from it.
That had to be a struggle and a half, to say the least, to know that this isn't right, but not being able to release it to someone who could help you personally.
Yeah.
As you know, you couldn't change him, but you could only, change the way you were dealing with it.
Right.
What was a lights on moment for you, or was there one where you said, this is what I have to do for Hailey?
Yeah. Well, my freshman year of high school, my mom and I were not getting along at all. I was hormonal. I was 14 years old. I knew everything. Like I said, my mom and I were a lot alike, and we butted heads quite a bit. And so I was like, okay, Mom, bye. I'm going to go live with my dad. And so I went to live with my dad my freshman year of high school. Living with him, I learned. So I lived with my mom through the week, and my dad, I would go every other weekend or so. Living with my dad was way different than going to my dad's on the weekends. I realized when I lived there, he is really in over his head. He is not doing right. And so I was there for probably 6 months or so. And I remember calling my mom, and I was like, Mom, I want to come back. I don't want to do this anymore. It was hard. I moved in, and my dad changed. He was expecting me to take care of the house. He was being more needy than I remember when I was with him on the weekends. And it wasn't the environment I thought I was coming into. So after I lived with him, I kind of realized, okay, this is not a good road that he's down. So then a couple, I don't know, probably 6 months after I moved out, I would go visit him. And since I lived with him, I had realized, how he was becoming. Right. So when I was visiting with him, my visits became different because I realized, but there was before I lived with him and after I lived with him. My visits after I lived with him, I knew what was going on. So there were some times I went over there and I said, Dad, I can't do this anymore. I can't come over here and spend time with you while you're passing out on the couch. It's not enjoyable for me. I can't be around it. It is stressing me out. It's giving me anxiety. And my mom kind of told me, that's what you're going to have to do, because if he doesn't see that he's losing you, yes, he's going to keep doing what he's doing.
No reason to change if there was no consequence.
No. And I, being daddy's girl, I hate to say this. It's not because I'm proud of myself, but I was his purpose in life. He worked at the Muncie Sanitary District and he loved his job, but he didn't find joy there. His marriage wasn't great. they were just cohabitating. And so I was his purpose in life.
Well, you were doing well in school. That's something he could be proud of. You were doing well socially. He could see a lot of things in you he probably wished he could see in himself. But to look at you from his point of view, he may have even felt like he was doing okay because look at you.
Yeah.
But you were letting him know that there's a line here and we're crossing that.
Yep.
And so how did you move forward from there? You confronted him in, it sounds like increments, different points, different times. Did you ever really just have a face-to-face, nose-to-nose, knee-to-knee kind of talk?
I did, and I remember it specifically. My mom drove me over there. I must not have had my license yet, so maybe I was 15. And she drove me over there, and I had previously written him a letter, and I think I still have it, actually. It was probably like 4 pages long. I wrote him a letter. I mailed it to him. It basically was along the lines of, you need help, and I don't know what to do for you, but I can't be involved with it, and I'm over it type of thing. And I never heard back from him after I sent him that letter. And I think I had called him on Father's Day or his birthday or something, and he didn't answer me. So I had my mom drive me over there because I was like, he didn't respond to my letter. He's not answering my phone calls. And I thought I was going to go over there and I was going to find him dead on the ground.
Sure.
And I walked in the house, and sure enough, he's sitting on the couch watching TV. And so I knocked on the door, and I remember going in there. I mean, I can see it in my head right now. I walked in there and I sat down right in front of him on the couch, and I kneeled down on the floor and I said, I sent you a letter. I called you on Father's Day and you never responded to me. I'm not going to live this life anymore. And if you don't figure it out, I will never talk to you again. And probably some other choice words were said in there because I was hurt and I was frustrated, and I grew up
concerned. Genuinely concerned.
Very concerned. I mean, I remember the whole ride over there. I was telling my mom, I think I'm going to walk in and I'm going to find him dead on the floor. And because I didn't trust his wife to take care of him. And so I was concerned. And then when I got over there and I saw that he was just sitting there watching TV, then I was mad because I was like, you have been putting me through some serious concern and anxiety and for what? And so, yeah, I basically gave him an ultimatum, and I said, if you don't figure it out and get yourself some help, then I'm never talking to you again.
So you made that confrontation very bluntly.
Yeah.
And needfully, I might say, on your behalf and for his sake.
Yeah.
It wasn't an attack. It was, I care, and I don't want you to see you go in this direction any farther than you have. You've already expressed that concern you had at finding him dead on the floor.
Yeah.
And, that had to be a feeling you had multiple times. Is this the last time?
This is, I have voicemails saved on my phone for probably over 3 or 4 years that I had accumulated, and I had saved them on my phone because I didn't know if that was going to be the last time he left me a voicemail. So I have 4 years of voicemail saved on my phone, which it actually turned out to be really great. I actually, side note, on my wedding day, because he wasn't there, I was able to piece together his voicemails for our father-daughter dance.
Wow.
And play those at my wedding. So
wow.
Yeah, it was
I can't imagine what that must have been like for anybody and everybody who knew any part of your story, and just by your dad being gone.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about his last hours and day here in a little bit, but lead us on up into that, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'd given him that ultimatum, and obviously, as you know, with addiction, that didn't change anything. I said, I will never talk to you again if you don't fix it. I obviously didn't mean that. I loved him with my whole heart. He was my dad. We were so close. So was I as faithful to spending time with him? No. Did I spend as much time and effort trying to call him after that? No. But I didn't leave him in the dark. I was still, his child, and
you did not abandon him.
I didn't abandon him.
You just had to step back.
I had to threaten him, and I thought that would work, and it didn't. And so, the last thing I could do was to pray about it. I had been praying for him for years already, but after I gave him the ultimatum and realized this isn't going to change anything, I put my prayers into overdrive, right? So I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and I said, Lord, he can't live this way. I don't want to see him this way. Can you please just take this addiction from him? Because, at this time he was doing pills. He was an alcoholic. I mean, he was buying a case of beer a day and drinking that and taking pain pills and muscle relaxers. And I just knew one day this isn't going to end well. So God, I need you to take this from him. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And
let me interrupt you right there.
Yeah.
You're talking about all that time in prayer. Where was your anxiety at that time? Was it higher, or had you come not to a point of wanting to lose your dad, not to a point of wanting to see him struggle, but maybe more acceptance than you'd ever had before of where he was?
Yeah. I had kind of realized that this was how it was going to be. I let go of the, not concern, because I still wanted him to be good, but I let go of, I can't do anything to fix this.
Let go of the control that you hoped you could have there as well. Is that accurate?
Yes. After I gave him the ultimatum and I realized it didn't work, I let go of that.
Okay.
So I kept praying, and I prayed for years, 10 years. And eventually one day my prayer was answered.
Why don't you share? Folks, this is Tanner. I've heard this. It's an incredible story, but the God we serve is even more incredible. And this is beyond coincidence. This is a story unlike any I have ever heard before. Get close. Yeah. Listen in. Go ahead here, Hailey.
So like I said, I had prayed for 10 years, and actually a coworker of mine had been leading a Better Life Brianna's Hope chapter in Daleville. And I went to my dad one day with a pamphlet and information on this group, and because my coworkers kind of knew the situation a little bit, and I brought a pamphlet over to my dad and I said, hey, Dad, there's this recovery group going on in Daleville. It's 5 minutes from your house. It's faith-based. It's not Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's somewhere I know the people leading it, and I think it's going to be a good place for you to go and get to know people and talk to them. And I didn't think he was going to go. I mean, I've been praying for this man for 10 years and he hadn't done anything. So I was like, you know what? I can try, but he's not going to go. A few weeks go by and I prayed for him, and I said, Lord, I think this is going to be a really good thing for him. I need him to go to this. And sure as heck, he showed up to a meeting, and I was stunned. I was like, he drove there and went to this by himself, and I didn't even have to take him. So I was stunned and I was thrilled, and he loved it. He loved the group. And I actually went with him a couple times because I wanted to be there for him. And there weren't a lot of people there that had people coming with them, but I wanted to be there for him. I went to the meetings with him. He probably went for 4 months or so, probably. There was one really cool time I went with him to a meeting, and the leader of the group passed out these ropes to everyone. I still have the rope to this day, but
Let me share with you folks a little bit about what those ropes were for, and that'll give Hailey a chance here to regain a little composure, which is easily understood, the tenderness of this. But those ropes, we actually took about a 12-inch piece and we cut it in two. What we did with that then was hold on to one of those pieces and give the second piece to someone who was a part of supporting us, encouraging us, helping us along. So go ahead, Hailey. You were talking about having that rope.
Yeah, so he got the rope and he pulled out a pocket knife and he cut it in half right there. And he said, I know who the other person's going to be that I give this rope to. And he gave it to me. And right there, I just thought, wow, this whole time, he actually listened to me. He actually, knew I was there. And, you spend a lot of time and effort and energy praying for someone and hoping that they can recover. And you just wonder, are they listening to me? Are they hearing me? And when he gave me the other piece of the rope, I thought, okay, he knows that I'm here for him. And I never gave up on him. So that was so meaningful to me. And so I got that rope, and so I was encouraged by that. I thought, okay, he's getting something from this. And so there was a day in February 2016 that I got a call from my stepmom. I was interning at the accounting firm at this point, so I was in mid-tax season. And I was at a client's office and I got a call from my stepmom, and she said, hey, Hailey, your dad is actually going to rehab. He's on his way to rehab right now in California. And I was like, what? I didn't even know he was thinking about going to rehab. He had not talked to me about this. He'd been addicted for 10 years at this point, and I never once heard him talk about go to rehab. So after he's been going to a better life for 4 or 5 months, all of a sudden here he is, he's going to rehab. I was like, okay, all right, we are doing this, and I didn't know what to say. And honestly, I'm still speechless thinking about it. Came out of nowhere. After I had been praying for years and years.
That was the nowhere, those prayers.
Yeah. It came from God answering my prayers after so long and not giving up. So so it was February, and I remember the first call I got from him at rehab was Valentine's Day is the first call I got from him, and I was at a client's again. I was still in tax season, and I didn't answer, thank goodness, because now I have a voicemail of this. He called me and it was about a minute long, and he said, hey, Hailey, it's your dad. Things are going wonderful, and I can't wait to see you again. Keep in touch with Tracy, my stepmom. Keep in touch with her, and I'm doing great, and I hope you are too. And, I love you, and can't wait to see you again. And it was if you know someone in addiction, there is a voice, right? So I know his voice when he's on pills and when he's drinking. And his voice in this voicemail was something I had not heard in years. And the relief I felt was incredible, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is my dad, my actual dad, on this voicemail that I had not heard since I was a child.
Hey, sweetheart, this is your dad. And I got a chance to call you. Wanted to call and touch bases with you. Tell you everything was okay. Wish you a happy Valentine's Day. And I wish I could be there and see you. But everything is going wonderful. And I think it's going to be really good. So I don't know. I think Tracy's got a number that you could try to call and check in on me sometime. Keep in touch with her if you can a little bit. I appreciate that. And I love you so much, sweetheart. Thinking about you all the time. Hopefully I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.
So I got that first call Valentine's Day, and then I hadn't heard from him for another week. They wouldn't let you call people very often in rehab. So I heard from him one more time, talked to him for a couple of minutes, and, everything was going great. So he was out there for 1 month, and March 13th, I had picked him up from the airport.
Coming home.
He was coming home. He'd been there for a month, and looking back, this was a blessing. I mean, this day was a miracle. But my stepmom wasn't able to pick him up from the airport. So I did.
You didn't have to. You got to.
I got to. And, little did I know how this day was going to end up. But it was a Sunday. So it was Sunday at like 4 a.m. his plane arrived. So I went to the airport. I had a big sign that said, "Welcome home, Dad." So back up a little bit. I had mentioned this earlier, but he was not a clean, organized person. Okay. He was a single man for a while. So he still lived that like single man life, and his house was a mess. It was dirty. It was untamed. And about a week before he came home, I cleaned his whole house. I organized his whole house. I cleaned it, and I had this cork board that I put notes on it, and it said, "Welcome home, Dad." I had this little paper with, "I'm so proud of you for doing this for yourself." And I had like a couple Bible verses and stuff. And I put together this music room because, like I had mentioned earlier, music was so special to him. And so I had all his guitars set up, and I had his piano out, and I had sacred places for him to come home to. Because one thing I knew was, if you left in one way, he's coming back a different person, and I don't want him to come back to the same place. So I had his house all cleaned up, and so I got to the airport, and I have this "Welcome home, Dad" sign, and I see him coming down the escalator, and I can still see him today. Sorry. I can still see him today coming down the escalator, and seeing him for the first time sober in 10 years, it was indescribable.
Had to be hard to recognize that him.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that man in my adult life. My adult self did not know my dad that way. So I see him coming down the escalator, and of course, a big hug, and it was incredible. It was something I had never imagined. Seeing him come down the escalator, I never thought that was going to happen. I thought he was going to live in addiction his whole life and end his life that way. So that day, it turned out to be the biggest miracle from God that to this day, it's incredible. So we went to breakfast. We went to Cracker Barrel. We got breakfast that day. We went back to his house, and he bawled like a baby because his house was clean. And he said, "Hailey, I was so worried and stressed about coming home to a dirty house because I knew that's how I left it. And I came here, and you did this for me. You cleaned my whole house." And
this is the guy you gave the ultimatum to, and there you are. That ultimatum was out of love and still in love.
Absolutely. So, he was thrilled, and I can still see him just bawling like a baby because I cleaned his house, But for him, that was so big because it was a weight lifted off his shoulders, because he knew that the person he left behind wasn't there anymore, and he didn't want to come back to the same environment. So we spent that day just hanging out on the couch like we used to when I was young, and he had set up plans to go play music with some of his friends later that week, and he was calling old friends saying, hey, buddy, let's get together sometime. And, he was back in his clear mind. And so seeing him function in that space was so cool. And so, and later that night we had went to dinner. I mean, I spent from 4 a.m. until I think I left about 7 p.m. I spent that entire day with him. And my stepmom was at work that day. So it was just him and I. And it was like the old days. We got to spend dinner.
Maybe even better than the old days.
Better than the old days.
The sober and the clearness. Okay.
Yeah. It was inexplainable. So we got home from dinner, and he was tired. He was in California for rehab for a month. So it's the time difference and the time change and everything. And so I left and I went back home and to Indy where I was interning. And I got back and I called him and I said, hey, Dad, I'm home. And just want to let you know I made it home safe. And he said, okay. He said, I'll see you soon. I said, okay, love you. Got off the phone, and the guy I was dating at the time, I was talking to him that night, and I said, I don't know, something doesn't feel right. I'm worried about my dad. I don't know why. Something doesn't feel right, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Went to sleep like normal, and I got a phone call at 4 a.m. from my stepmom. And I thought, okay, she's just butt dialing me. And she calls me again immediately after. And I thought, okay, well, this can't be good. So as she's calling me, I got down on my knees and I prayed and I said, God, please don't let something happen to my dad. He just got home. I just spent this whole day with him. Please, God, I'm begging him, do not let this be something. And I answered the phone and she said, Hailey, your dad's been in a car accident. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, and he's dead. And I was like, no, they have the wrong guy. I said, he just got back. It can't be him. She said, the cops are at my house now, and they brought his ID, and it's him. And I immediately put my shoes on, my coat. It was 4 a.m. And I drove all the way to Daleville to his house at 4 a.m. And it was him. And
this had nothing to do with alcohol.
Nothing to do with alcohol.
Drugs.
Nothing to do with
any
drugs.
Type. I want to make that clear to you out there, folks. Don't know for sure. Did they determine it was a health issue? But regardless, this had nothing to do with his previous addiction.
No. And, the people who knew that he battled with addiction, that was the first thing they thought.
Of course. That's why I want folks out there to understand.
Yeah. And I said, no, there is 0% chance that he was under the influence of anything, because I was with him on Sunday. I was just with him, and the headspace he was in was not that guy. And I said, there is no way that he was under the influence of anything. And come to find out, he wasn't. They did they tested his blood. He had nothing in his blood. I think the crazy part is he wrecked his car about 1.5 miles from his house. They said that he had donuts and coffee in his car. He had actually went to the gas station that was east of his house, and the car accident was west of his house. So on his way back from the gas station, they think he fell asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. Wow. Hailey, I've said since the first time I've heard this is just one of those unimaginable stories. And so was that day that you were given with him. How much would it cost me to buy that day from you?
Oh my gosh.
I don't have enough, do I?
That day, at the time I had no idea why my stepmom couldn't pick him up. I was mad. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Your husband just came home from rehab and you can't be there to pick him up. And little did I know that God did it that way for me.
How you needed that gift.
Yeah.
How you needed those moments.
I can't imagine going that long praying for him to be sober and not getting to see that.
That leads us into this final question as we get ready to close here. The title of our podcast, Faith in Your Recovery. What does that mean to you as you share this story?
You can't give up on God. God has a bigger picture than we can ever imagine. You see a lot of people struggle and you want to give up because it's hard. It's hard. And I've never struggled personally. I've never struggled with addiction, but I've seen it and I know it's hard. And it's hard for the person going through it. It's hard for the family that has to see it, but you cannot give up.
10 years of prayers were answered for 14 hours. You probably spent more time in prayer than those last moments you had, but I bet you'd do it again for the same outcome. And you must have believed that would eventually happen, whether you could label it or not. But to stop, what if you'd have stopped one prayer short and not been able to have that experience?
I would pray for 20 years for 6 hours of my sober dad.
Wow. Hailey, thank you. This is an incredible true story and the result from an incredible God, and it tells us a lot about you. I'm happy it happened for you. This tears me apart every time I hear it because of your pain, but the joy that awaited. The scriptures say that joy comes in the morning. Weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And you got that. Praise God. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, what a privilege. And folks, we know that, you may be in that dark spot or you may have a loved one who's there. But I think Hailey's words are the best ones I could close with. Don't give up on God. Stay in the battle. Thank you. Amen.